Hey, what's going on, everybody? Today is January 5th, and you are listening to watching the Daily AI Show live. And today, nope, wrong screen. Today, hey, there we go. We are talking about, it's Aloha Friday too. I messed that one up. I can see Jimmy and Beth both got the Aloha shirts on. I forgot Carl.
It's winter. It's winter.
Carl
You
has
can't think about
never
it.
played
Why?
along. Carl thinks it's winter all the time in Canada, even when it's summer. It is now. And sure, now it's winter. Technically it's winter in Tampa finally too, But anyway, we have June, Beth, Carl, Andy. I'm Brian, and today we're talking about kind of a cool topic, which is prompt engineering. You may know that better if you're just sort of diving into AI as, hey, what do I tell GPT to do, ChatGPT to do, or Bard, or Claude, or any of the above. Doesn't have to just be ChatGPT, and maybe you know this, maybe you don't, depending on who's listening. There's definitely some ways to do it better. From the early days last year, where people were like, write me a poem in the style of Emily Dickinson about, Halloween. And boom, it would do it, right? That's a simple prompt. I ask it, and early on, we're like, that's amazing. That sounds like somebody wrote it and everything else. Well, as time has gone on through 2023, not only experts in the field, but the people who are building these chatbots, if you will, these language models, definitely put out suggestions on how to get more out of it. And now that we're like 14 months into sort of this from when ChatGPT first launched, there are definitely some do's and don'ts. There's definitely some power moves you can use that are going to just rocket fuel enhance your ability to use these chatbots. So we'll probably use ChatGPT in reference, but just know that if you're listening to this, you could use these same tactics with Bard. You could use these same tactics with Claude, or really any language model, and you're probably going to see an enhanced output from it. So that's sort of laying the groundwork of what we want to talk about today. And before, I don't want to dive in too deep into like the deep stuff, like few shot and these kind of things. But where would you say, who wants to jump in here and like, somebody's just kind of like, okay, you know what? It's 2024. I told myself I was going to turn on, OpenAI. I told myself I was going to get that $25 account. I just did it. Blank screen. What are some easy starting points that you guys feel like, if you're the basic user, where could they jump in? It looks like you got something, Jimmy.
Yeah. Like you said, there's lots of different methods you could approach this. But I think if you're a new user, learning how to do meta prompting would be very useful if you're starting at ground zero. So just a brief description. So meta prompting is essentially asking ChatGPT or Bard or whatever to improve the prompt itself. How would you prompt me to do X, Y, or Z? Or how should I prompt you to do X, Y, or Z? And I think for a very new user trying to get in on the ground floor, that will help you learn the structure and the kind of information that the GPTs want. And then you'll naturally start including that information in your further prompt. So basically, it helps you learn how to prompt the GPTs from the GPT, which I always found amusing and beneficial.
Yeah, in fact, I just used that today. Sorry, Beth. I was just going to say, I do advanced prompting and stuff, but I literally used that today, Jimmy, where I was writing a prompt series for diving deep into buyer personas on the sales side. And as I was doing it, I knew what my five prompt outline was going to be, but I absolutely did the meta prompting where I went back in and said, how could I make this prompt even better? How can I make this prompt get a better answer out of you, meaning the language model? So yeah, sorry, Beth, go ahead.
No, what I just want to say in this context is, if you're just getting into prompting and you're hearing this, it sounds like you get to ask someone like a human, how do you like to be talked to? And it's giving you, a considered answer. I like to be talked to this way. What it's actually giving you is what it thinks the next predicted best response is, which is likely to be how it likes to be talked to. But I just want to be clear about the back end of that. You may get to the same train station, but I want to be clear that you're going around in this predictive rack as opposed to the machine is like, thanks for asking. I really like this better. That's not what the machine is doing.
On this same subject, we're all kind of excited about the OpenAI announcement about the release of the ChatGPT, or the custom GPT store. And I have a couple of GPTs that are just not ready for prime time. And I'm trying to improve them and make sure that they respond more reliably to users other than myself. So I'm doing testing, and something will go wrong. It's like, why did that happen? And the best and fastest way to improve the prompt that's underlying that is to say, your last response did this wrong and forgot to do this. What can I do to improve the instructions so that won't happen? Bang! Out comes a list of additional language that could be included in the prompt. So yes, invite the GPT itself to provide the answers for how you're missing it, because sometimes prompts, especially if you're trying to guide an unknown user through a series of steps, sometimes those things get very complicated and difficult and unreliable.
Great advice. Carl, you got anything, any basic, we're going to get into the deep stuff, but like any basic advice? Like I said, you're kind of turning it on, maybe not for the first time, but you want to take it seriously in 2024. You're a sales you're just a business professional, business professional. And you're like, I know, I've been listening to the Daily AI Show now for months. I know they keep saying this can improve ROI for me, or just simply take an hour or two off my weekly routines. I've got a blank screen in front of me now. What do I do?
I think there was a post. I don't know. I can't remember where, but it said that, and it could be Rachel from AI Exchange who said this too. It's like, learn how to talk more human than less. I still believe we have been trained so much. So outside of our AI bubble, outside of our regular AI communities, I still see lots of people using it like Google to, one sentence, maybe two, but it's like, it's not supposed to be like that. So you got to talk, quote unquote, talk to it like a human. And then if it doesn't do what it's supposed to do, then respond accordingly. It isn't you do it and then you peace out. You're like, this doesn't work, because that's how you would think Google would do, but it's not. So it's like, that's incorrect. I wanted this. Oh, okay, no problems. And as you have that conversation, it's different than just a one-time transaction. I think that's more of how I see it. It's like, a lot of people think it's just a 1 or 2 time transaction and then you got what you got and that's it. It's not. It's an actual like deep conversation to get things further and further. Not all interactions, but that's what, to get the most out of it.
And I think that's a great point, that some prompts don't have to be long and complex. Others do and should be, because of the intended outcome of it. And we've used this analogy many, many times before. It's a common one, but Carl, to your point, thinking about using ChatGPT as if you were maybe giving instructions to an intern or maybe a teenager or somebody who's not directly doing the same job you are and needs more context around the topic. So there's great examples for this, but like having the model assume a persona is a great way to do it. Hey, I need you to act as an expert in this. That's a pretty common sentence that you'll see a lot of times. You'll also see things like, go slow, think about this. These are things we would say to an intern. If I was going to talk to my 13-year-old daughter and I said, hey, I need your help. I need you to run over to the store really quick and get X, Y, and Z from the store. Now, to my wife, that might be a very short sentence. I might say, we don't have dinner tonight. And for my wife, because she's my age, or she's bought meals many, many, many times before, that's all the context she has. Everything else is built into her. She has full understanding of what I meant when I said there's no dinner tonight. Can you run to the store? That's all she needs. But if I was to try to get the same result from my 13-year-old daughter, of course, I'm going to have to really break this down into actionable steps that don't feel so overwhelming to her. When I say, I need you to provide dinner tonight for the family, can you run to the store? That would be very overwhelming for most, not all, most 13-year-olds. Some 13-year-olds are probably doing that for their family. So it's just a good example of, when do you provide more or when do you provide less? Well, my suggestion here is always assume that ChatGPT is coming, at least in the initial prompts, because it will learn and grow, but assume that it doesn't really have the context that you need. So you're going to have to break it down a little bit more, and you will definitely get better answers on the back end of that. And to your point, Carl, don't bail after the first one. It's just that you might have not asked the specific right way. Maybe to Andy's point, you need to say, could you help me here? Because I keep asking you, I'm not getting the results I expect to see. What could I be doing differently? And then that gets back to what you said, Jumi, about sort of that meta role of, hey, let's work together. Like, this is not just a, you go do this and I disappear for 20 minutes. And I expect when I come back to my screen that this will be done. That's not a great way to go after using some of these language models. It really needs to be this co-pilot, this partnership of human and AI that's really, really going to get you the best results.
I just want to follow that up really quickly with the reason I think that's what we have to think about is because as these models improve, they obviously the companies and people behind them want them to be easier to use. Hence, that more natural language should be easier. So the more natural your conversations, we won't need all the things that we've learned in terms of like putting all these things act as this. I believe as it gets better, you won't need to put that in.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think it'll circle around to being it's just a Google again. It's more of like you won't need all that context and specific criteria. It's just it won't need as complex of a prompt if you're looking for a massive output. It'll become easier to do.
And by the way, that's sort of a little off topic because I know we're going to talk next week about OpenAI announcing the custom GPT store, but that's a great example, right, Andy, of when you don't need all that context. Now we have the ability to build these just very quick custom GPTs who preemptively build in this context. So all this act as, and I need you to understand this before you start. And I want you to go slow. And I want you to think through the problem before you provide me the answer. Or more importantly, don't look at my answer first and then give me your opinion. Work through this math problem first, then tell me whether you think I did the right thing or not, right? All this stuff can now be built in very quickly into like a custom GPT. So that might be a little outside. It's still prompting, by the way. It's still the same general rules here, but just so we don't get too far off track on, building custom GPTs versus just prompting. Okay, so there's some like ground rules, I guess, if we will. Okay, so now let's say we have a more complex ask. We need the language model to produce a series of answers or steps, or maybe we have a large ask that has multiple parts to it. What would you guys say is the best way about approaching a problem like that? How's the best way to use ChatGPT or any of the language models for a task like that?
One, I want to jump in here again, just in terms of, I had this problem with a chatbot, a custom chatbot, both I think in Retune and Chatbase, where people were asking a complex question requiring multiple answers. I think for a real estate one, it was give me the price, give me the location, and give me how much the down payment was. And for the longest time, it was very difficult for the bot to answer all of them. It would answer maybe one or two, and then it would cut out the third. It wouldn't answer it. Or a second example is if there's a really long list. So the correct answer would be like number 1 to 10, and then number 7 and 6 has A, B, C, D, and then let's say 9 has A, B, C. So it's a pretty complex response and it's layered. So you actually have to use a few shot, like, so provide examples in the prompt and actually say, hey, when asked about complex questions, break it up. Like you have to give those specific instructions with an example. And it actually, once I did that, all like every single thing that's in its knowledge base, I guess, makes it a lot easier to answer. Because I think we have to remember that Andre Karpathy video where he talked about system one thinking, system two thinking. System one thinking is 2 plus 2. Everyone right here probably thinks 4, but it's like 5,697 times 4,822. You have to actually think through that. And even he says that no large language model right now has system two thinking. So you kind of have to build that in to your prompt or your custom instructions.
So in the context of that, what we're doing and what we then would prompt the large language model to do, and math is a really bad example because it can either do it much faster because you said, hey, Wolfram, and it knows it's going out to the Wolfram plugin, or you walk it through step by step. But we would like do, depending on how old you are, you would start on one end or the other, but you would do each like lineup number by itself in order to get an approximate answer and then find that. That's the system two thinking through the problem. Does AI speak bilateral? I do not know the answer to that question. And Jack Forte also.
Does AI speak bilateral? I'm not sure what that means. I
It
know what
speaks
bilateral means, but
it speaks bilingually or polylingually. Can you give us a little bit more? And Jack, this is something you're really great at, Brian.
well, let me read the question out for anybody that's not seeing our screen. It says, I use ChatGPT 4 to improve my cold outreach emails. Do you have any tips on how to prompt for emails at a high level? I do this a lot. I've built a whole prompt library. It's got over 100 sales prompts at this point in it. And it's one of the products from the company I work for, Scaled. So this is something I focus on a lot. And what I can say, Jack, is the answer is usually more detail about the persona. We really try to focus a lot at our company on how do we create highly personalized emails at scale, which is not the same thing to say use AI for automation. We don't want to just send out 1,000 emails that all look the same. However, we do want to send out 20 really good emails, but we don't want to spend as much time doing it. And that's where we try to use AI to solve that problem. So for us, we try to do a really good job. First and foremost, our first layer is to make sure that we understood the buyer persona as an example, because this is sort of a little off topic, but I'll give you a few. We might want to understand the buyer persona, obviously, industry, sub-industry, role and title of the person we're trying to reach out to. We might add in maybe a PDF off of the LinkedIn page. We're going to get into stuff like what are some of the recent trends in that sub-industry. We're going to want to know things like the pain points of that particular person and so on and so forth. There's about 5 or 6, 7 different layers. And what I ended up doing was actually creating a custom GPT that solves for this. And that's exactly the idea, is that if I'm going to send out a cold email, that at the end of the day, I've done my research well enough that now I know I can go after a certain title, role in industry and sub-industry. So the one I was using today, just for an example, would be VP of sales. The industry is automotive. Sub-industry is car sharing, right? Mm-hmm. Totally different than just saying automotive. Car sharing that's like Zipcar and things like this. So that's those pain points that very, that industry is going to be so fragile all the time because of new technologies and stuff. That VP of sales is going to act differently. It's a long answer to a short question, but just that's where my brain is with this, Jack. It's a great question. And ultimately what I do is just getting back to the prompting here, I do this in a series. And so the first prompt is not tell me everything you know so I can send this email. The first prompt is I have this title, I have this industry, I have this sub-industry. Can you tell me more about it? I want to learn more about these 3 things. Then let ChatGPT come up with an answer. And then this is where this whole partnership comes in. Then I have the opportunity, because I didn't ask for the world. Now I have the opportunity to just look at this answer and say, okay, that aligns with where my thinking would be. Or perhaps I am going to bounce off to a Google and just do some quick checking on a Zipcar or something like that and go, yeah, that aligns. I'm good. Now I'm back to ChatGPT. Now I'm like, okay, can you help me understand trends? That's a separate prompt because I only want ChatGPT to focus, or Bard or Claude, to focus on that particular question. And then I'm building to it. The other reason for that is if you ask a lot of questions, just on a simple level, if you ask a lot of questions at once, you have an opportunity that ChatGPT will just time out on you and it'll just error on you. And now you're 3/4 of the way of the thing you really needed. And it goes, whoop. And now the only option you have is to start all over again. Breaking these up into bite-sized pieces and bite-sized prompts is a much better way to do it. Yes, you're going to use a little bit more of your allotment, but you are going to get the answers you need in shorter form. And you're not going to run into that risk of it just saying error and that's it. And then you're like, your only option at that point is there is no continue, which there should be, but there isn't. So now your only option is to say rerun. And now you're SOL if you like the answer first, So hope that helps.
I have an idea that was not original, and I want to give credit to Nicole Lepper. And by the way, this is a really competent person who Brian's going to interview here shortly on the Daily AI Show. But she put out a post just yesterday, I believe, that showed a process of improving a prompt to get GPT-4 to be better or to get to the right answer in a riddle. And what I think is an important takeaway from that was she finally was able, after iterative improvement of this prompt, to get the right answer to the riddle by putting prompting into there that requested that before it gave the answer, that it went back and reviewed repeatedly and evaluated all of its thinking once again, and then do it once again. I mean, do something recursive to really, examine what its thought process was. And so the insight here is that if you're just doing conversational prompting and you're doing that via the API, for example, you're being charged for all the tokens that you put in and all of the responses that come out. But you don't get charged for telling the GPT to go through a recursive process of evaluating its own output before it gives you a text output.
Right.
So you get additional compute time for free, in effect.
Yeah.
I mean, you get charged, but you still only get charged the one thing.
Yeah.
That's right. You get charged for the load of your text that's in the prompt and the load of the text that comes back to you. But you can ask it to do, I mean, this is an absurd request, but and it wouldn't improve much. But if I said, look, do this next subroutine 100 times, I want you to go back and evaluate your response. It's going to follow that instruction. It's going to use a lot of compute time to do that you don't get charged for. I'm not trying to rip off GPT or anything, but I'm just saying.
No, the other side of that is, like I said, is you may run into a timeout error at some point, both through the API and on the other side. So there's that part of it too, is you may actually not get the result. But yeah, I love that idea of, utilize these language models' ability to do, let's call it background thinking, before providing answers, because that is a great way to use it. And you're right. If you're using ChatGPT, GPT-4, if you're just in ChatGPT in the paid account, let me be clear here. If you're using ChatGPT Plus, which is the paid account, that means you're most likely you can opt not to, you can use 3.5. But if you're using GPT-4, that language model, you get 30 requests every 3 hours. Is that right? 40 requests every 3 hours?
40 requests every 3 hours and 25 through a GPT, a custom GPT.
Oh, is that right? It's less through a custom GPT. Okay.
Which by the way, makes it hard to test the GPTs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's limiting, to say the least. So there are pro and cons. I mean, Andy, that's a great example of trying to get away with not having to write so many individual steps. You can certainly mess around with a more complex prompt that says, hey, here are these 5 micro prompts, if you will. And I want you to run through these in order, where there's not going to be necessarily a human in the loop. But what you're trying to do is say, Here's how we test it. Here's a good example. When we first build these, all of us, and the people we currently interact with who are doing these things, all of us take a similar approach, which is I'm going to start simple. I'm going to start at that 13-year-old level, at that intern level, and I'm going to break everything else nice and neat. And I'm going to do it in a really clean way. Now, I'm going to get a result out of that. Let's say after using that approach where I have 5 individual prompts, and every single one of them, I go back and check every single time. Let's say now I run through that process. It's a simple GPT, custom GPT maybe, or I just have it saved and I just keep using it, right? Maybe I run through that 50 times. And out of 50 times, I'm pretty happy with the results 48 out of the 50 because I've iteratively gone in there and made some adjustments along the way. And now at time 50, I really don't have to be the human in the loop as much. That's a great time to now say, well, where can I start to eliminate the places where I have to come in as the human and be that hand-holding partner? Because it may just be that you've gotten it to a point where we can start to eliminate that, which is going to cut down on either the API costs, or it's going to cut down on actually having to go against your limit of how many times you can send in a prompt request to the model. So there's a lot here. You don't have to be right the first time. What I would say is be very clear and very, methodical about the way you ask your questions. And that brings up another question. Another point to make here is the idea of writing in Markdown or writing in a certain pattern. Now, Beth and I helped teach a class at the AI Exchange where this is something we focused on a lot as the instructors for that course. And we call it Markdown. There's not necessarily a right or wrong way to do this, but I'll just tell you the way we taught it is basic, which is there's an act as, which is sort of the starting point. Like, what do you want me to act? What's the persona? And then there's some context. Context, just think about is, hey, what's that background information you kind of want this ChatGPT to know, this language model to know about? What are we talking about here? Oh, you're a pilot that's doing blah, blah, blah. Okay, it's got some context. Then some criteria. Well, to Jack's point, if it's to write emails, hey, here's some criteria that are important to me about how to write an email. It's never salesy. It never says the word delve, which is like the worst word in the world, and all models want to use it, right? It's like there's certain things in there. I only want it to be 150 words. I want it to have spacing. That's your criteria, because that's the criteria you're telling the model, hey, follow this. These are the rules. Then you just have your instructions, which is, hey, this is the thing I want you to do after the fact. And what's great about using a system like that, it can be very basic. You don't have to get overly complex, is that one, it makes it very easy to go back in and make adjustments. And so to Carl's point, this really shouldn't be a one and done. I mean, it's fine, but that's also kind of a Google type thing. I have this one answer and I'm going to go find it. And when I'm done with that answer, I'm probably done with that thread. As opposed to maybe a Bard or a Claude or ChatGPT, I may want to come back to this same idea over and over, aka the buyer persona or writing emails. And so if I write it out in such a clear and concise way, it's going to be very easy for us to go back and make corrections along the way and just keep fine tuning it till we get better and better answers. Because more than likely, whatever you got today is going to be better 20 days from now after you've used it more and more times. So anybody want to add anything, Beth? I was kind of short on that because it's hard to explain without showing it on paper and all that. But anything you guys want to add? Are there any other areas that you would add to like a Markdown that you really like to use?
There is one thing that I think if anyone followed what happened with Chevy and in terms of their custom chatbot, I think you do have to be aware if you're going to build something, and I had to do it for all my clients as well, is to actually know what kind of jailbreak techniques people are going to try to use for fun, or if you plan to use private Pi data into your bot, that you how to prevent that, or at the very least do your best to do a proactive defensive strategy, I guess. And there's you can probably just go to ChatGPT and upload those images and it'll tell you what exactly they were doing, and then from there how to plan to what kind of prompts you need to put into your custom instructions from people to break in, or using different techniques to change the custom instruction to make it do something else. I think that's something you'll have to do if you plan to, uh, have those custom chatbots with clients, or even if you plan to, I don't know if you sell a custom GPT or just have it prevent people from breaking into it, I guess.
I have a question. OpenAI recently put out their own guide for better prompting of OpenAI's GPTs, and I haven't read it. You guys, any of you have read it? And is there
Fantastic.
anything that's new and insightful that came out of that release?
Insightful, yes. Well written, fantastic. I highly recommend everybody going to check that out if you want to dive in a little bit deeper, because it's going to cover topics on there that we just won't have time to talk about today. Examples, which is another way of saying that, is called few shot, but just examples for anybody who's maybe not using this stuff all the time. How to use things like triple backticks. What does that mean? How do you bring stuff together? How to use things like just simple colons. I use this all the time, by the way, when I'm talking about variables, because if I want to reuse a prompt over and over and over again, I want to make it really, really easy for me or anybody that I'm training or teaching or using my prompts to switch out the variables. So in our example before, the industry was automotive, sub-industry was car sharing. Let's swap those two out for something else and something else, or another title. So when I write it, I'm going to say title equals blank, industry equals blank. And the point to that is that it just makes it really easy for you to go in now. If your prompt is like, I want you to do this with this industry and this with this title, and I have something, but then right underneath that paragraph, I'll say title equals whatever. That way, if I go to use that prompt again, I just have to copy and paste it. And the only things I have to change now are title equals whatever's after the equal sign, which makes it very easy to not have to go into long paragraphs of text to try to figure out where it needs to be swapped. So they do talk about that. They talk about embedding. I'm looking at it right now. Who else has read it? I mean, it's phenomenal, by the way. It's long and it's really well done. And there are a ton of examples to take you out to the OpenAI playground. Now that's worth mentioning.
Right.
AI
because we've been talking about ChatGPT sort of through this, which has a chat interface that actually functions slightly differently. And the examples that we are talking about and what they just came out on December 17th. And again, I'll put the link up, platform.openai.com/docs/guides/prompt-engineering.
Pretty easy to Google, by the way, though. If you want to just look for it, look OpenAI prompt engineering, you'll find it.
Yep. And all of those examples, super detailed, like a ton of great information. At the end of each, it says open in the playground. And the playground doesn't have that chat interface. But it is a place where you can put the system message and the user message, so you can give it examples of how you want it to respond, which is what few shot is, right? Like, hey, when I say this, you say that. Let's try it another time. And then, okay, now I'm going to say this. What you going to say to me? That's basically what
I think that is to me, the best the best use case, because sometimes people get frustrated about it's not doing what I want it to do, or it's not providing the outcome I want it. The moment you put just one example, it will do it. And it'll do it consistently. So I think like every single time, sometimes I forget to put the example, it won't do it. And I get frustrated until I remember, oh wait, just like a regular person, if I don't give an example, they'll just kind of do whatever they're gonna do. So
Carl, I have an experience that it doesn't maintain stability with respect to examples in knowledge for custom GPTs. So I have an example of the format of the output that I wanted to follow rigorously. And just last night, it spit back the thing, and it changed, even though it has not only the example in its knowledge, but I upload a text file in the session that has the correct format. It added information to that in a bad format. And I'm boggled. Why, how could it miss that. And so, as I suggested at the top of this thing, I said, you changed the format on this, and you forgot to include that. And it said, oh, well, here's some guidance on how to improve that. Give me examples. Look, you have example in your knowledge, and I gave you an example in the session. So don't believe that even with all of your deliberations on how to improve the prompts, it's going to get it right every time. But the beauty of it is you can continue the conversation, and just as I showed, you can say, hey, that's not what I really wanted, and give it a natural language instruction to continue until you get the result you want. But we have to train novice users of GPT that's this conversational ability that isn't built into the prompt, and it is a native capability of the GPT, and it'll really help you out. You just be persistent is my message. Be persistent and keep working with GPT until it gets where you want it to be.
And I do have one tip on that, Andy, that you can try real quick, which is I've noticed with custom GPTs, because the way they have the weights and the creativity in there is like a floating scale, and it's super annoying. I would much rather just be able to say, put it at 0.3. That's beyond the scope of this conversation, but that's just me. What I've noticed though is that with the knowledge documents, not always, but when I usually say pre-read, pre-understand your knowledge documents, when I first start my new chat, it pulls that into memory, and then I get better answers out of it. When I say, hey, you had this in your knowledge, what I've noticed is it goes, oh, and then you see the little half circle going around. It's like, let me go look. And it was like, I would have loved you to look beforehand. But this is a great example of working with a machine that may be obvious to us, but it's not necessarily obvious to the machine what our intended purpose was. I mean, humans are extremely complex. I mean, Carl, you talked about this. How many different ways can you ask for the exact same answer? And so when people are trying to build these complex chatbots, or the Chevy example where basically somebody got the bot to agree to give them a car, no takes backsies was the quote in there, which I love. And it was, they got it, they didn't really get the car for $1, but I never followed up on it. If Chevy was smart, they would have made that a whole promotion and given them $1. So
yeah,
they should have made it a big promotion and made a commercial out of it. But regardless, my point to it is there are hundreds and thousands and probably millions of ways for everybody. If we were polling audience to say, how would you ask this question? And we could all be meaning to get the same answer. So this is something that will continue to come up. 2024, Carl, I agree with you. Some of this we won't have to do as much. We'll have to see what the next iteration of some of these models brings. Andy, you've talked about this a lot, where the future really probably is more of a mix of many multimodal or many models that are experts in their own field. And it may be that if you work in a particular field like healthcare and you may not know the difference, but when you log on to use that language model, in the near future, and honestly, even today, you may not have to put a whole lot of context in there. It's already going to be a system that's highly trained and built and really focused and niche on your use case, and you won't know any different. And it could be that in the next several months, we're all typing in something, and in the background, the model is going, use this one, use this one, use this one. And the end user doesn't really recognize any difference, but is actually changing models in order to give us the most appropriate answers. So that's
keep checking. Join us Monday through Friday. If that stuff is happening in the background, we're talking about it.
Yeah, it'll definitely come up on this show. Okay, we are over on this one. I had a feeling we might, because there's so many good things, but I want to make sure people really have a good baseline. Go read the OpenAI document. You'll learn a lot there for sure. There's some other good stuff out there, but also there's a lot of bad stuff out there too. I got to be honest. I read a lot of crap on the internet that's about how to prompt, and I'm like, that's not great advice. So I don't know. We kind of don't do TLDRs too much anymore, but if we could can everybody give maybe a 30-second TLDR of just a great piece of advice for people who want to get better or get better answers out of their prompting in 2024? And I don't know, let's just run around. Jimmy, are you ready for one?
Yeah, I'd say just keep asking questions. If you ever get to a point where you're stuck, then just ask the GPT. It's like, oh, hey, I'm stuck. I'm not sure how to explain this to you. And just keep practicing, just doing it more and more and more, and involving it in all of the different aspects that you might be using it for. You'll just learn quicker on how to do more effective and prompting and things like that. Yeah.
Okay, Beth.
I'm gonna flip that a little bit and say, ask GPT to interview you. And you can even go through the iOS app, turn on voice, and have it literally, it's asking questions out loud and you are answering them. Let it know the context up front. Like, hey, I have an idea for a LinkedIn post, but I need some help putting, I'm going to need you to write it, and I need some help getting it out. So ask me. Right. And then it's literally prompting you for the information it's going to need. And then it generates the post. Right.
Love it. Carl?
I think like it goes back to essentially what I first said in this video was use natural language, treat it as just a human that you're talking to that doesn't have any context, and go through it like that. And exactly what Jude me said.
And I'll say a simple way to provide context and prime the GPT to be in the right domain of knowledge in a mixture of experts model, like Brian was talking, is to give it its role as the beginning of your prompt. Pump it up. You are the smartest and most, thoughtful consideration engine ever built about this subject. And what that does is it primes the thing to be ready to respond to questions that you have in that sort of subject area or domain of expertise.
Yep.
Love it. And the other thing I'll say to add to that maybe we haven't said already is, don't paint yourself in a corner. Think of prompts. Not all prompts are necessary to be used 100 times, but definitely think that way. If you're building a prompt, if you're taking the time to write a prompt and you think, I could use this prompt every single week, 5 times a week. That's a great indicator to think, let me slow down, let me build this out, maybe use some markdown, let me clean up the language a little bit, and let me really work to get this prompt to give me a great answer, because then you can just go back to that prompt and use it and just change out the variables. So whatever it was, I need to write an email to this person. Now I want to write to that person. I want to write a LinkedIn post about this idea. Oh, now I want to write a LinkedIn post about that idea. The idea is the variable. That changes, but the rest of your prompt should work over and over and over again. So I would just say, think long-term, think, how can I use this prompt 100 times in 2024? And if that was the case, what additional time or attention would I give to it to get a better answer? So that would be my suggestion there. All right. Hopefully if you're listening to this, whether you're a novice or you've been using ChatGPT, you got something out of this. We're going to be talking about this all throughout the year, obviously, but we really want to give something that was sort of a starter guide and sort of a launch pad for 2024. That's it for this week. Next week, one of our shows will definitely be about the OpenAI custom GPT store. So we'll talk about that and what that means, as well as many other topics coming up. So that's it, guys. Have a great weekend. Aloha Friday. See everybody. We'll see you next time.
Happy Friday.